Oh, that's some delicious stuff right there. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Dulcimerica. My name is Futch. Thank you very much for joining me. This is part 3 of a study of 10 different types of chords that'll help expand your abilities and your vocabulary on the mountain dulcimer. You can think of chords as, colors on your palette that you paint with. And we're familiar, and we've looked at already, the major chord, the minor chord, and the suspended chord. And these are fairly common, and you could even call them in some circles the vanilla chords. They're the primary color chords, like red, green, and blue can be used and combined to create all different types of colors of the rainbow. But now we're getting into other types of chords that are going to give us more colors to paint with. And this week we are focusing on one of the most, if not the most important extended chord, and that is the dominant seventh. And by extended, that means that we are going to start adding notes beyond 3. Our basic triad is now going to become 4 notes, and we're starting to add numbers, and we're starting to get outside of the octave with the next chords that we look at. So it's going to be a lot of fun. But before we go any further with this, I want to say hello and a big howdy to one of my patrons on Patreon, Janet Krall. Janet, thank you very, very much for becoming a patron. Thank you for being there every single day as I create music and tablature and video for all of you guys to enjoy. You make it possible for me to keep rolling, especially in these times of COVID-19 where I didn't know what I was going to do when everything got canceled. But now, thanks to you guys, I was able to work all summer into the fall and looking forward to the winter, being able to relax and just make music. And that is absolutely invaluable. Thank you to Janet and to all of my patrons for helping make this possible. Now, Patreon, if you're not familiar with it, is a subscription service. It's like Netflix or Hulu or Disney Plus, but instead of motion pictures by major studios, you've got the artwork of many different types of people from all different types of traditional and non-traditional art forms. For me on Patreon, I offer up everything I've ever done for just $5 a month. That includes all of my albums, especially the rarities that are no longer in release. That's all my books, it's all of my tablature, all of my music that's not even in books, all the videos, hundreds and hundreds of hours of education and entertainment videos, and a lot more than that. Plus, every single week, I do an exclusive bit of production, including Mailbag Monday, and of course, Dulcimerica, along with Dulcimerica Deluxe. Every week there's new stuff, so you're not just getting all the old stuff, you're getting new stuff all the time. $5 a month, or if you join up as an annual pass holder and pay for the whole year, you get a 16% discount, which is 2 months free, and a nifty little magnet that comes with its own special perks and benefits. If you want to find out more, come on down here to patreon.com/bingfutch. Scroll down a bit, get past all the sign-up stuff, and check out the open house section with all the tags. Lots of free stuff there for you to download, and if you like what you see and the format and all that, do consider becoming a patron like Janet and what is now 604 others who are all part of my happy little community. Guys, thank you so much. I very, very much appreciate you. And we have been having a lot of fun, a lot of good reviews coming in. Thank you guys out there for this series on chord building and how to use these chords. So I love music. I love it more than anything else in the world. And I'm a Disney fan, as you guys know. And the Sherman Brothers were responsible for some of the most amazing music that ever came out of the Walt Disney Studios. Of course, they were responsible for Mary Poppins. And yes, they wrote It's a Small World, but don't hold that against them, right? These guys knew how to wring a maximum amount of emotion from a song, whether it be happiness and joy or sadness and despondency. And they knew their way around a scale, borrowed chords, extended chords, color chords, to get these things done. And their use of seventh chords, the dominant seventh chord, is absolutely legendary. Well, one day I got a chance to meet Richard Sherman at a Disneyana convention here in Orlando, Florida. His brother, Robert, couldn't be there for some reason. Robert wrote the lyrics, but Richard wrote the music. And I walked up to Richard and I said to him, "Thank you to you and your brother for teaching me that dominant seventh chords are the center of the universe." And he smiled like the strangest smile. And I went, "That's interesting." Just a neat guy. Later on, when I was doing some studying on music theory, I looked up dominant seventh chords, and there was an entry on a Wikipedia page that said, and I quote, "Many musicologists believe that the dominant seventh chord is the center of the musical universe." That's just crazy. In any case, why is that the case? And in order for us to understand that, and especially going forward, looking at all of the chords we're about to see, it's important to understand the scale degrees of the chromatic scale and the intervals, what the names of all of the intervals are. Remember, intervals are the distance between two notes. So if we start from this note, say it's the root or the tonic, and then we keep going a half step up, further and further away from that. If we do that 12 times, we come up with the 12 half steps of the chromatic scale. And it's from these 12 half steps that we pull the 7 notes out of, or 4, the diatonic scale. So right now I'm going to use my handy dandy melodica to demonstrate how these intervals sound. And I'll do this in the key of C for simplicity's sake, and for those of you watching the keyboards, you'll be able to see how far away I go as I go from C, the root, to C, an octave above. Starting with the very basic interval, which is called a unison. It's just the same note played twice. Sounds like a trucker coming through, doesn't it? Then, if we go from the root, or the tonic, or the 1, if you will, up a half step, we end up with an interval called a minor second. Sounds like the Jaws theme, doesn't it? Now, if we skip and we don't go up to the next half step, but just go past it to the second, we end up with a major second interval. So we're going to keep doing this. We're going to keep going up a half step. The next interval is a minor third. Then we have a major third. Then we have a perfect fourth. That one's really important because we do a lot of stuff with the 4 chord, and being able to detect when the 4 is in play and also when to move that chord, it's a good thing to know. And so if you just remember, "Here Comes the Bride," that's the sound of a perfect fourth interval. Coming up next is what they used to call the devil's interval. This is called the tritone. Sounds kind of creepy, doesn't it? But it does serve a very important harmonic purpose, especially in the dominant 7th chord. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Then we have the perfect fifth. That's also very important. That's the dominant right there. It's important in a lot of different ways, especially when we are about to close a tune. As we mentioned before, remember last week, the 5 likes to go to the 1. And if we think about "Twinkle, twinkle, ba, ba, black sheep," that's the interval of a perfect fifth. Moving along, a minor 6th interval. Then we've got a major 6th interval. A minor 7th interval. A major 7th interval. And the octave. Now, I might have been starting with the C major scale, but these intervals, no matter where you start on a keyboard or a fretboard, that's always going to be the case. So your minor second down here is also a minor second here. Sounds like the Pink Panther theme. So no matter what note you start with, that interval will always sound the same. It'll have the same character. They won't be the same 2 notes, but they will have that same basic feeling, and you can assign musical mnemonics to them in order to understand what's going on. So inside of a chord, you've got 2 or 3 intervals. You've got the interval between the 1st and 2nd note, the interval between the 1st and 3rd note, the interval between the 2nd and 3rd note. And how these intervals move and interchange and resolve to other notes in chords that you move to is part of what's called voice leading. And it's a very, very important part of understanding the harmonic function of chords in music theory. And once you get your head around it, everything kind of starts to demystify. So I always recommend to people that they study intervals and start to recognize and train their ear about what these intervals are, how to get them, and what purposes they serve and what effects they create. And as I've mentioned here before, check out a program online called Better Ears. Better Ears is one of the best ear training programs that I've ever seen, and it'll help you and coach you through the process of not only learning intervals, but also how to ear train for chords, tempos, pitches, key signatures, and a lot more. Scales. It's a great, great program, worth the money, and it's not very expensive. So now that we've talked a little bit about the intervals, let's talk some about this voice leading concept of moving around. There's something called a cadence, and a cadence in the terms of a chord is a melodic or a harmonic movement that ends up in a resolution. And so there are different types of cadences, but one such cadence is going from the 5 chord to the 1 chord. There's a very strong sense of finality, the end of a sentence, if you will, when you go from the 5 to the 1. Here's a major, which is the 5 in the key of D, and we're going to go to the 1 chord, which of course is D major. Isn't that wonderful? Now, as you look at me playing those chords down there, again, we're not just moving this one chord A to this next chord D. We've got 3 different notes, A, C sharp, and E, that are going to move in different directions. In this case, they're all moving up this way because I'm playing this sort of D major chord. And now we've got D, F sharp, and A. But if I went to form a different type of D major chord, some of those notes would go down, some of those notes would go up, and so the resolution is different. It's still very satisfying, but the sound of the resolution is different because those notes are traveling not just upwards, but they're kind of splitting off in different directions. How about this resolution here? That makes a lot of difference in terms of moving from chord to chord, seeing where each of those individual notes are going to resolve. And so when we talk about the cadence is this movement, this harmonic and this melodic movement. We have our major chord, which is a root, a major third, and a perfect fifth. We have our minor chord, which is a root, a minor third, and a perfect fifth. We know that we are numbering these notes of the scale with the scale degrees 1 through 7, and each one of these notes has a specific sort of a function to it. The 7th scale degree is often called the leading tone, and the leading tone is a half step away, typically referring to the 7th note of the scale. You can use a leading tone in many different ways. The resolution is very satisfying because it's either a half step up or a half step down. So when we're looking at the dominant 7th chord, we've got a major chord, a root, a major third, and a perfect fifth. But we're adding a 4th note to this, and the 4th note is going to be a flat 7th. This is a naturally occurring chord that's built off of the 5th scale degree. Remember our hop, skip, and jump activity that we were doing to build chords with just 3 notes? Well, you can keep doing that and keep hopping to add notes to get really fun combinations. You can get major 7th chords, you can get 9 chords, you can get 11th chords. And I know that sounds really crazy. We're getting way off into extended chord land. But if we continue hopping, for example, with the D major scale, and we build off of the 5th scale degree, which is A, we'll hop and get A, and then we'll hop again, we'll get C sharp, and then we'll hop again and we'll get E, and then we'll hop again and we'll get G. And that is a naturally occurring 4-note chord that is a dominant 7th. It's built off of the dominant scale degree. And this sucker loves to resolve back home to the 1 because it's got that note and it's going to make that half step. Now here's the fun thing. We have a primarily 3-stringed instrument. So how are we supposed to play a 4-note chord? This is one of the secrets that comes in handy when you're playing a 3-string mountain dulcimer. First of all, our 4 notes are A, C sharp, E, and G for an A7 chord. So here's our A major. A, C sharp, and E. Right below my thumb, where I'm playing A, there is a G. That would be the flatted 7th. Normally, the 7th scale degree in the key of A would be G sharp, but we have flattened that note here. So there it is, right? 1, 2, 3. That's an A7 chord, even if it doesn't have all the notes. The relationship between these remaining notes still suggests the presence of an A7 chord. What did I take out of the picture? I took out the root. Isn't that bizarre? How do we get a chord that functions as an A7 chord where the namesake, the root name of the chord, isn't even there? Again, it's the relationship between what remains, and what we have remaining is the third, the major third, the perfect fifth. We brought in that minor 7th, the flat 7th, and that works. So that's called a rootless voicing, and one thing that you can do is remember this. Remember, a major chord is a root, a major third, and a perfect fifth. And the only difference between that and a minor chord is what happens with the third. The third we take down a half step for a minor chord. It becomes a minor third, and that is going to be a minor chord. So what we do to change the third is important for the difference between a major and a minor chord. What we do with the 7th, whether it's a minor 7th interval or a major 7th interval, is what makes the difference between a dominant 7th and a major 7th chord, and we'll be talking about that next week. The 5th can be altered for different types of chords. We can make augmented chords by raising the 5th up a half step. But generally speaking, the 5th can be left out of the picture. And as we just found out with this A major chord, the root can also be taken out of the picture. It's largely the interplay between the 3rd and the 7th and what we do with those 2 notes. So if you ever find yourself needing to leave out a note in a 4-note chord, leave out the root or leave out the 5th. Don't leave out the 3rd or the 7th, because you'll be losing the spice that makes those chords unique and sounding the way that they sound. I hope that makes sense to you. So as you can see, I don't need the 1.5 fret to play that 7th chord. But the 7th chord, or excuse me, the 1.5 fret and the 8.5 fret, and of course the 6.5 fret and the 13.5, all those frets, they all will help you to get these 7th chords. Let me show you a couple more. If you don't have the 1.5 fret, let's talk about D7. So we got D, F sharp, and A, and we can play that in different parts of the fretboard. Okay, so let's think about substituting one of those notes, and we're going to make ourselves a D7 chord. So first of all, there are a couple of ways of doing this. We can go to the 7th note of the scale and then drop that down a half a step. So D, F sharp, A. The 7th note of the D major scale is C sharp. So we're going to take C sharp down a half step to C natural. So a D7 chord would be D, F sharp, A, and C natural. Remember, we can drop out the root, D. We can drop out the 5th, A. So let's take a look at this shape right here. There's our D, there's our F sharp, there's our A. Right here at the 6th fret on the bass string is a C. So let's get rid of this C, D up here at the 7th fret, replace it with this C at the 6th fret. And voila, we have a D7 chord. If you have the 1.5 fret, that's a lot easier, because the 1.5 fret gives us F natural on the outside string, C on the middle string when we're in DAD tuning. So here I've got D on the bass string, that's the root. I've got F sharp, the major third, on the melody string, and I've got a C on the 1.5 fret. That's a nice, lovely voicing for a D7 chord. What's missing? A. We're not playing A. And we don't need the 5th. Again, all we want to do is add and make sure we've got the 3rd and the 7th. So you can do a very easy D7 right here. An important relationship interval-wise, I mentioned the tritone earlier, the tritone interval. The distance between the third and the seventh is a tritone in a dominant seventh chord. Remember that kind of crazy, creepy sound? It's right there. It's one of the main ingredients. It creates a tension, and that tension begs to be resolved. And that's what makes the dominant seventh so powerful, because it sets up the tension and then it releases. So watch what happens when I take the D7 to a G major chord. The F sharp is going to go up 1/2 step to G, and the C is going to go down 1/2 step down to B. And what we end up with is a mighty fine resolution. Wow. Isn't that cool? That's so nice. Let's do another one. Let's do A7 to D major. Of course, we already did that one, but let's do it again. Let's do a G7 now. G7 is going to be right here. Sorry. The G7. So remember, a G major chord is going to be G, B, and D. The seventh note of the G major scale is F sharp. Take that down 1/2 step. We end up with F natural. So here we've got F natural on the 1.5 fret on the melody string. We've got our B on the middle string at the 1st fret. And we could just strum open and have D, the 5th, right there. But I like to bring the root into the picture. So I bring my thumb over on the 3rd fret bass string and get that G root in there. And that sounds really super nice. Now let's take the G7 and we're going to resolve. And we're going to take that to the D chord, the D major. Nice. Not as satisfying as a 5-1, but still really, really super good. So you see now sort of the makeup of the dominant 7th chord. And oftentimes people don't call it a dominant 7th, they just call it a 7th chord. And when you see it written, it's going to have a letter and the number 7 next to it. And that's it. It's assumed that when you talk about a 7th chord that you are talking about the dominant 7th. However, there are other 7th chords and we're going to handle those next week. But here you see the harmonic makeup of it. You understand a little bit about what's happening inside of that chord when we move it around. You understand how to build it. Now, how do you use it besides going from the 5 to the 1 chord? Well, 7th chords I like to think of as a sweet little kiss that you can place upon your current chord before you move on to the next chord. And again, that kiss is going to create a little bit of flustered tension, and then it's going to resolve. If you think about a piece of music as a rubber band that is kind of slack when you begin, and as you begin to play, things kind of change and there's tension. You stretch that rubber band out, and then you release that rubber band. Whew, okay, and then you tighten that rubber band up, and then you loosen the rubber band. And it's just this kind of a thing. It's like a movie. There are big, awesome action scenes and quiet, contemplative scenes, and then something else happens, and then things are chill. It's a roller coaster ride. And the best songs do all kinds of things like that, that maybe you aren't even aware that are happening. So let's take a very basic tune, and I'll show you how a dominant 7th chord can add, not necessarily drama to the proceedings, but just create enough tension and release that it's, the happy parts are even more satisfying. Let's take Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace is a very basic tune, 1-4-5 in the key of D. We're going to start off with D major. Go to G major. Vanilla chords. A major. So down here, right in the first 3 fret range, I've got A7, I've got D7, I've got G7, which means I've got 7th chords for the 1, the 4, and the 5 chords, the most popular chords and the naturally occurring major chords in the key of D and in every key. So that's very helpful for us right there. That also means even if you change the tuning of your mountain dulcimer to something else, that means that you'll have the 1, 4, 5, 7 chords right there at your fingertips. So I'm going to go ahead and add in some 7th chords to Amazing Grace and show you how that changes things by introducing some tension and then producing an even more pleasing release. All right, that is just a taste of how you can use a 7th chord, and it's a lovely, lovely thing. And the more you play with it, especially if you have the 1.5 fret, the more I think you'll use it and begin throwing it in to the tunes that you're playing. Remember, it's just a kiss on the cheek of the chord you're currently playing. So if you're playing D, make it a D7 very briefly before you head into your next chord. And certain chords are going to work better than others, but definitely when you're going to, if you're going from the 5 to the 1, or even if you're going from the 1 to the 4 chord, it sounds really, really nice to build up that tension and then have some release. I hope you have some fun playing around with the dominant 7th chord and really soak it in, because next week we're going to take a look at 2 more 7th chords and we're going to get even further into our musical color palette. Thank you very much for joining me, everybody. We'll see you next week.